I'm delighted to be here with Anthony, whose poems I've admired for years. The linguist, Roman Jakobson, talks about what he calls poeticity. It's not a great word, but he means what really makes a poem a poem. And he says, well, it's when a word is felt as a word, and not just a kind of indifferent way of referring to something else. Now, he doesn't mean that poems that make you feel they're made of words aren't also about the world. Rather, he means by feeling something about those words, you get some new access to the world. And that's what your poems do for me over and over again. Anthony is a plurilingual, plurilocal poet. So we'll be talking about language, sound, and place. And we'll also be hearing Anthony read.
Yes.
Please ask questions when you are moved to, or comments. This is a small group, and let's make it a conversation. Anthony and I have been talking about different poems of theirs, and we have one in particular that you would like to read.
To sleep, possum to dream. Possum descending a stairwell, a stepladder, numbers of sleep rounded up. Possum defending sealed caves of seal sheep, sea clouds, hair merely daisies, telling a petaled profusion of slumbering. Possum enameled, possum logging out early, possum without compass seeks haystacks in haystacks, thorough and navigable cringly acres. Impossible n'est pas français. A possum's nest, nest pas français. A possum cantabile, possum untrainable. The nest unscheduled stop. The nest is silence, the deepest possumism. Opossum knows possum wakes only for possum, so accordingly, all possibilities hold.
Thank you. I will never hear possum or possibility quite the same way. Tell us about this animal word.
Well, this animal word partly comes from the fact that when I was very small, we have a sonic environment.
It's kind of Caribbean, you think? It's a little calypso.
Past the duchy.
Yeah.
Or no.
Yeah.
So, okay. Does anybody want to feel inspired to get up and move? Don't hold back. So very often, when my mother took me for drives in the night in Port of Spain.
Did you arrange this, or?
No. Then, do you know the chicken banana dance? No. Then, okay. So, very often when my mother took me for night drives in Port of Spain, she would tell me not to look at the lights. And because I had very big eyes, she would say, don't look at the lights, opossum. Don't look at the lights. And she didn't realize she was ingraining in me the belief that I could grow up to be something like an opossum or a Dr. Seuss creature, and something a bit tufty that could curl around on itself. And so part of the soundscape of my poems have always been creaturely noises. And I think as we were talking about earlier when we were sitting on the bench,
yeah.
Are you back with us yet?
Yeah. So words are sounds,
Yeah.
and even sometimes creaturely sounds.
Yeah.
While we were sitting on that bench, you also began telling me about actually your early experiences being read to
Yes.
by your parents.
That's right. So I was unaware that people were passive readers because although I had learned to read by myself before I was 2 years old, just by watching Sesame Street, which does, however, mean that I associate words and numbers with music, sounds, and highly colorful things rushing around. That explains a lot.
Yeah.
But my parents used to read things to me and always go outside the story. So they would say things like, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? What would you have decided? What kind of voice do you think this creature has? What noise does it make? Why is she so stupid? That sort of thing. And in a way that is very similar, this is what helped me take a decolonial approach to school long before the word decolonial was in common usage or possibly even in existence, though as D is a productive prefix, there may well be evidence of its use before its current usage. And I thought that every time one read something, one questioned something, one tried out different voices, that any time there was dialogue, all texts were possibly theatre texts. My parents were very much adapting, so they would stick to the written words, but then they would adapt, direct, annotate, and that just became the way I read. Mm-hmm. So when I wrote, I created poems that I thought people would approach in this way, and then I found people saying that I was a difficult poet, and my response was very much, why don't they want to play? Why being so mean?
So you want us to be you as a child.
No, sorry.
Well, but you want us to participate.
Sorry, that's really rude. No. Don't be me as a child. It's a deeply uncomfortable experience. Plus, you'll be much smaller than most of the other children in your class. Sorry. So, I do want participatory reading.
So you want your reader to play with your poem?
Yes, and also to look things up. So the whole idea when I was at Oxford as an undergraduate and I met this idea where I started avoiding critical theories and the history of criticism because I didn't really understand how anybody could have thought that you could look at a floating text on a page and it was fine just to approach the text as text because I was always aware that there were attitudes and knowledge existing in the space around the text. I couldn't agree with Paul Éluard that the white space around something was the marge de silence, the margins of silence. I always saw them as a stir with other voices, knowledges, and possibilities.
Anthony, you did graduate work, a PhD, in Old Norse.
That's right.
Not an obvious destination. Tell us about your engagement with that language, which is hard to learn at Yale.
Is it hard to learn at Yale? Yeah. Because there are a lot of really good resources, and it's a very regular language. So if you wanted to teach yourself, you could get E.V. Gordon's book, and it's far more regular than Old or Middle English. So it's also very interesting because it's got what's called the middle voice, which otherwise I believe only ancient Greek has. Mm-hmm. I'm starting learning ancient Greek when I go back to Edinburgh, but I can't really speak to the middle voice in ancient Greek with too much fluency. I'm sure someone in the audience can. And it's this thing which is not really reflexive. It's an in-betweenness of apprehension and experience. So it was very obvious to me because at Oxford they taught Old English and Middle English. They took all the options for that. They thought if I don't learn it when it's there, when will I learn it? It was about access to more literatures, access to more worlds. They thought they would drop in an Old Norse class, and the teacher, Heather O'Donoghue, began the class without any preamble. She just started reading in Old Norse, and I thought, these are amazing sounds. And I want to learn to make these sounds. It was a completely sensuous, this is musical, but also amazing that you could hiss and crackle like this. I want to do this. It sounds like a dragon.
So you were seduced by this special language sound.
It was, yes.
That was ancient.
Exactly.
And from, well, Viking culture.
Yes.
The sound of your own poems, how do you, I mean, I began by talking about the way in which your poems seem to celebrate and make us conscious of, your poems delight in their words.
Thank you, Sarah.
They are in lots of ways about their words or about the world through their words.
That was one of the things that people used to laugh at in an unpleasant way. Oh, this poem is about language. And I don't really like it when people laugh in unpleasant ways. Might it work better if I read something out that you would cue me into, and then we could do a bit of prakrit?
Absolutely. Yeah, let's do that.
Or were you not?
What, actually, you know what? Here is, I'm going to ask you to read rhythm.
Okay, will you find rhythm for me, please?
I will find rhythm for you. And in the meantime, well, perhaps while I find it, you could tell our audience what it is exactly.
Promise I'm not going to show you the chicken banana dance, which my mother says is everything that's wrong in the world. So basically, if you grow up in Trinidad, you can grow up hearing a lot of different sorts of sounds. So even if you don't understand Sanskrit, but you hear somebody chanting Sanskrit epic, you're hearing language which is bound in particular ways. There are regular recurrences of sound. Similarly, my mother used to tell me stories of growing up in East Trinidad in the forest or in Sangre Grande, a town near the forest, and going through the forest, and also about all the neighbors. And she always spoke about a neighbor who'd impressed her, a woman who, as she put it, quarreled all the time in a very striking voice and had her head tied. And then one day I was looking at a Yoruba video. I was looking at a kind of Nollywood clip to tie into Matilda. And my mother said, "What is that? That's exactly how that lady sounded." And that was the way we realized that there was an active Yoruba speaker who didn't have anybody left to her. She was just talking to herself out in East Trinidad. And so I think picking up on these very naturally mixed but undocumented soundscapes, they might not be documented by academics, they might be disbelieved if somebody did an interview for newspapers that shall not be named. Not the Trinidadian newspapers, those are good newspapers. But then those are things you're going to register in a poem. You don't have to go through the same channels of archiving and proof and argumentation. You can register those mixities at an aesthetic level, or in the crafting of a sound object, or in the way that the lines seem to run off into something else. I always say that if you listen to something like a symphony by Beethoven, unless your hearing has been formed or deformed by classical training, you don't say, "Oh yes, the 4/4 has changed to 3/4. We have gone from G minor into, B flat major." If I'm not able to do this, I don't understand this piece of music, and I don't deserve to be listening to it. And yet somehow people listen to poetry like that. It's like, oh yes, unless I can count this, that, and the other, and add up all the illusions and give myself a scorecard at the end, I don't have access to this poem, and either I must demean myself, or I must be angry with the poet, or defund the publisher, or something. Yeah, okay.
I'll give you this poem to read.
Thank you.
I'll tell you that it is a riff on a very famous poem by Sir Philip Sidney.
Yes.
And also that there are letters and phrases scattered across the page in various ways.
And I will also tell you, but I'll tell you this after I read, I will not explain anything. This is a floating poem. You have to somehow intuit all the whole context magically and then discard the context and also treat me as if I were dead and all the other things people do, then do a radically situated reading and then consider whether I've written the body and then say that the poem refers only to itself and then derive the politics of the poem. Rhythm. After Sir Philip Sidney, Astrophil and Stella 31. Steps. Oh, moon. What? The. Oh. Ooh. Oh, moon. Constant love, want of wit, constant love, want of wit, constant love, want of wit, constant. Rubies. Red. You. Mine. Be. Here. Our beauty's proud. Our beauty's proud. Here. Be. Are you above love? The fisherman waits. Above love, beloved, and yet stilt walkers exact vengeance, firemen dance on ladders. Oh, lovers, scorn. Oh, love, oh, possess. Oh, you, fullness. Thank you.
Thank you.
I do feel like we should read something with syntax in next. And
Yes, well,
yeah.
I'll give you something. I'll give you something with the syntax. Yeah,
Okay,
I
at
promise.
some point.
Well, your poems are so much about sound. They're also interestingly about the visual. Anthony's O's were also, well, they're the O of poetic invocation, and they're also the O of the moon.
Yes, that's
and the O
right.
of the mouth, I think. All
They
these
absolutely
things.
are. And in fact, this was a commission from a recent work press in Australia who were doing an anthology of poems called Abstractions, and rhythm was one of the themes. And I put a few of these abstractions into this book. I reworked some of them. But it was actually written in Japan, and I don't speak any Japanese, but I had learned to put O in front of things that were honorable. So we had started, because we didn't want to give offense, putting O in front of all sorts of ridiculous things, completely without irony. And we were taking the honorable elevator to go and get the honorable drinks out of the honorable drinks machine. We were being hosted incredibly beautifully and wanted to live up to it in some way. But the other thing is I'm quite obsessed with dogs, so the O is also howling. And then the other part of the arrangement is that you get normal lineation at the end when the stilt walkers come in, but Sir Philip Sidney isn't allowed normal lineation. He is the fragmented tradition which comes down to us from the sonneteers of the 16th century, and the stilt walkers are from Trinidad because of a stilt walking group called Touch the Sky. Touch the Sky, yeah.
Sidney's poem is a famous lyric poem. It's a poem that we associate with, first-person expression of strong feeling. There is not always an I in your poems. Could you talk about the sense of self that you project, create in your poems?
Yes, I mean, one thing I will say is once again Celery's a sounding, and I would ask anyone who has a practice of prayer or positive social activism to engage one or both, because for me the lyric I isn't merely the stylized or authentic cry of an individual or individualized self. It's always collective. And this is something I learned from the poet Martin Carter, the Guyanese revolutionary who was jailed in 1953. But also the lyric as a form is replicable, and Francesco Giusti, Giusti, has done a lot of theoretical work, some of which is available open access, on the lyric as a replicable, shareable form that goes from voice to voice, context to context. So what seems like the most individual cry is actually the most collective. I'm probably misrepresenting Francesco there, but this is what I got from talking to him over the last few years.
Here's a poem. I'm not sure it has much syntax, but
Do you want to do another
let
one?
me invite you to read it. It is called "I" is a pronoun.
Yes. No, I also would like to talk about language and trauma at some point, and the way that language and trauma, and the relationship of trauma to sound and soundscapes, both internal and external, because those sirens are a noise of someone or several people being traumatized or reenacting trauma in which we all participate, in which we are some way complicit, because presumably somebody's being healed or kept safe at the expense of others. I is a pronoun. There are 3 layers of trauma in that, actually. One is the delegitimizing of Trinidad and other creolizing Englishes or languages. I is, I am, how do you match verb and subject? And then also the stupidity of queerphobic and particularly transphobic people who say they don't like pronouns. And I sometimes want, as an Oulipan exercise, as a language game, to communicate with them in a language entirely stripped of pronouns. To say all the things they want to say, but to have no deictics, no this, no that, no he, no she. Or I want to ask them, why is it that you idolize Finland and the way Finnish children apparently aren't taught to write until much later, but you don't idolize the fact that there are no gendered pronouns in Finnish. I is a pronoun. Hear her relax, release, grammar, case by case, like dressage, like a dressing, like a dismount, like a mountain, like a tourniquet, like a ticket, tossed into sunlit perfect, the high throat of a non-combustible bin. Hem, him, wired, withered, like a horse's tail, like silver tinsel, like a salon floor, like ashes, like a sequence, like a challenge in the grassy selving syntax of a Roman road, direct, no longer taken. Aye, my love, this is none of us. A plague of visitors upon this place, a ring of Lucifers upon this flyer, a famine of genders upon these permissions, a mean of colors upon this slip. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I feel as though these poems are they're not going to inhabit an I in any easy way. It seems related, possibly. I'm going to ask you to read another poem now about the body and the body and its kind of mobile and changeable identity. This is a poem called Mike Swimming.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So this poem is dedicated to Mike Chin, who's a very, very old friend of mine and is a class assistant theologian at UC Davis. And Mike, in fact, was down visiting me in New Haven, but couldn't stay for the festival. I've been here since September 9th. We're supposed to be working on a puppet show version of scenes of the Iliad together. And Mike is very fluent in a number of languages I don't know, such as ancient Greek, Latin, and Coptic. So in the marge de silence, they're actually the margins of the classical languages. Mike swimming for C. Michael Chin. I am convinced my body wants to be free of its breasts, and bleeding or not, to fly with imaginable joy, unimaginable pain, flexing, not as the angels, but as cathedrals do, stone through which light is expressed, and just as clouds shift shape, shed rain, creating blue shade, waking seeds and illusions. I swim devastating lengths, turning again, not to meet myself, O my companions in silence, but to break breath with shimmering you, destroyed into life-giving droplets, cupped heads, a tumult of shine. I know you by immersion, shared gasps, not by your faces, neither concealed nor revealed, loving beyond body shame, as above, so below. So sky and water pool in one and never the same motion. My body is new with joy. Thank you.
Yeah. My body is new with joy. This is a book, Anthony's most recent, called Polka Dot Wounds. You could perhaps tell us about the title. It's a book that I think, like a lot of your work, is deeply filled with joy, with expressions of joy. And I say that not in some sense of casual happiness, but in a kind of with a really kind of ecstatic apprehension of language, of the body, of the world. And you know how little of our writing really grasps such a feeling. So I'm grateful to you for being able to communicate that and share that. And it's related for me to this sense of the poem as play, and as a kind of verbal space of play in which, as a reader, I'm invited.
Thank you so much. Of course, play has several senses, so that's a really good question. It goes back in some ways to my parent. It's a parental word, because the word lila in Sanskrit means play, both in the sense of playing and in the sense of a drama. And in terms of Hinduism, which was the tradition in which I was raised, among others traditions, there's also the idea of the cosmic drama or the play of energies. So when I'm playing with language in the poem, I had a sense of play as being potentially serious long before I ever read theories of serious play or the ludic when I went to Oxford as an undergraduate. And then it also seemed obvious to me that because poetry that is published is iterative, and you can go back to the poem, but also it inscribes itself in your memory, often in fragmentary ways. A poem remixes itself, even if you go into it with an incredibly serious intent. I will take this poem seriously, analyze it and annotate it, or I will inscribe it in my heart because I need to take something into the protest, or I need to take something into the hospital room, or wherever it is, and need to hold on to a form of words while my sense of self is being pressured to fly apart. I will, even apart from those considerations, there are these playful moments where language will unmake itself, either because we're tired or we're falling asleep or waking up. The hypnagogic, the hypnopompic mind, those are important to my practice. So the play that is surreal as well.
We haven't talked a lot about place exactly yet.
Yes.
And perhaps we can. You are a poet of, well, many places.
Yes.
I think of how many of your poems are rooted in some experience with other people in a particular place. Often you're directly alluding to them or to your shared experience. You're a poet of islands and coasts.
Yes.
Yeah, perhaps you could speak about that kind of imaginative framing for your writing.
Thank you so much for raising that again. I keep thanking you for your questions, but this is because they're exceptionally well thought out, and because when I'm in the midst of writing, I do experience my writing in quite a synesthetic and immersive way. So whether or not people experience my poems as synesthetic or immersive, the process of composition is very noisy and very complete for me. I may have to mutter or move around, and as I was saying before. And in terms of the coastal business, there's a very silly poem in there which has got coastal navigation, has got its claws into my back.
Which one is that?
It's one, I think it might be the Inishbofin poem, which is
yeah,
long.
yeah.
And that's a poem which is almost entirely responding to a particular place, which is extremely coastal. It responds to Inishbofin, which is the smallest island off the west coast of Ireland. And a friend of mine, Father King, who's an islander, curates, or used to curate a festival there. And it was a festival of poetry, music, and drama. And we would all go across after the festival completely exhausted and happy and strung out and help unload things from the ferry onto the mainland. And there's a completely strange sort of play of voices because we'd been sitting up to traditional music sessions till 3 a.m. And sometimes we would catch on to a phrase. There's one poet who took himself beautifully seriously and said, "Coastal navigation gets its claws into my back." And that became our catchphrase. So whatever else was going on, which included things like a beautiful performance of extract from Finnegan's Wake, we would go up to each other and whisper, "Coastal navigation gets its claws into my back." And I think there's a way in which we can associate refrains and places. Virginia Woolf does that very beautifully in Mrs. Dalloway, and where she takes a refrain up from Shakespeare.
And to the Lighthouse, too.
Yeah, and to the Lighthouse, yes. And that's certainly, because I conceive of poems themselves as places very often, I think of the poem as something we can inhabit. So not that the poet inhabits the pronouns of the poem, but the reader is invited to inhabit and dwell in and with the poem. The poem itself becomes a soundscape, which is a stir, the way the Inishbofin experience is one of sounds that are astir and can be exchanged and passed around. Yeah.
Would you like to read that?
I would love to read it. It's quite long.
Yeah.
So lots of different people are in this, and many of them are underslept, happy, and possibly not quite sober, in a good way. Island conversations, Inishbofin. If you're thinking ahead, don't do that. You're on the island now, going full boffin, giving away whatever you brought to sell. The clocks at Murray's are inverted, going deep boffin. It makes a difference. It makes sense. We'll figure it out. Dedra says, imagine if everyone who came to the island took away a stone from the island. Extreme and scattering bright. I pick out my spots in the cemetery. Fever and general shutdown. Gabrielle opens a red bag and gives me good pills. Elaine can do the dead man's float forever. Pauline likes blue cheese. The lady in the craft caravan has gone vegan, changing our 3-year conversation about fudge. I buy a fairy door for Alex. I know Noel's house mostly by the hidden corn crake. I sleep there in the attic. And Sophia pencil sketches the invisible corn crake. On the island now, extreme boffin. Crack, crack. Scattering bright. Alan the novelist is made to hear who has rapey exes. He listens gently. Pints line up on Murray's wall. Elaine, like me, doesn't like being shushed. singermen, cinnamon, whatever. She can do the dead man's float forever. Pauline really likes blue cheese. Nashville can't remember its past, Joel from Nova Scotia tells us, while Memphis can't forget it. Meantime, from a ship of rubbish and tobacco, the story of the Dutchman fascinates the Finn, gone full boffin. Coastal navigation gets its claws into your back, she's retweeting, and another singer makes the beagle in the aisle fall asleep. The dog steals the show, but Elaine can do the dead man's float forever while the session's going on. Blue cheese Pauline has a birthday brownie, one candle in it. What am I doing with that lighter if I don't smoke? If we burnt some things, the dead man's, by the cliffside, float forever. We're not at liberty to disclose. Kit Pussy Townsend dances with a bear, armpits winking. The Venusian East Beach, too fucking hot. Anne Sophia's going full coastal navigation, threatening to pay for her accommodation or else burn the cash at the bar of the Black Gate. Father feasts and lodges us like a king. We're loading Boffin, bringing Boffin to the mainland. The big stupid box first. What next? What next? Stop complaining, lads. Blue cheese, cowboys, absolute cowboys, extreme. I've double wrapped 2 scattering prints of wine-dark seaweed, bright. You're always singing to yourself. And after writing this, I then translated it into, the spectrogram, which shows your voice, the shape of your voice. And then I flipped the spectrogram vertically to make it look like a fish spine. So this poem was meant to be part of an installation that would show the spectrogram of itself.
Wow.
Thank you.
I hope someday to go full boffin.
I hope everyone will visit Inish Boffin.
Yeah. Do you have questions and comments for Anthony? Please don't. Yeah, here. Yeah. Yeah.
Like this while I ask it. I'm interested in two things you brought up. You talked about the lyric form, or that scholar who was talking about the lyric form.
Francesco Giusti.
Yes, and how it's a shareable form.
Yes.
Yesterday you talked about you sort of touched upon your relationship maybe to experimental poetry, and I wanted to know if there's a way to tease out, especially in the UK, it can be different here in the US around contemporary poetry and the lyric, but I wondered what it was like for you coming into your poetry with the kind of strict or colonial forms of prosody and the lyric and and experimenting. I just wanted to know your relationship between those two and lyric work. I know I don't know where my question is, but it's in there.
I wasn't particularly influenced by strict forms of prosody for a couple of reasons. One is that we weren't really taught very much poetry at school when I was there, because sadly a lot of the highly academic and geeky nuns had retired, and we had lay women, many of whom seemed to be making it up unhappily as they went along. I'm sure I do them no credit, but then I often wasn't in school. They might well have been teaching poetry on the days I wasn't there. So I associated a strict prosody with my mother dramatizing bits of 17th century French drama and explaining Greek mythology to me. So I got my prosody from Alexandrine, and from my mother explaining to me things like A loves B loves C loves D is a tragic situation. Let's inhabit all the voices, but we can also count them off, and having things metered makes them memorable, which is helpful for the actors. So I didn't feel that was a prison house in language in any way. But then the flip side, though, is that when I did go to the UK, I didn't realize that in some ways English language poetry had its own artificial divisions, or that people weren't all writing prose poems like Mallarmé. So I started writing prose poems like Mallarmé thinking I was doing something perfectly normal. And then people said, "Oh, you're an experimental poet." I said, "Oh, okay." Yeah. A lot of it was actually very wide-eyed. And I didn't find a good home in poetry. I found a better home working at the Oxford English Dictionary, and then more recently with the Dominican friars and singing Dominican chant. Things like that are really the sources of my poetry. In poetry in the 1990s was a fairly toxic space, especially for a person of color. People would come up and say something like, oh, I saw you were anthologized in the Caribbean book of, this is a real example, the Oxford Caribbean book of poetry. You don't want to be considered a Caribbean poet, do you? And I said, I am a Caribbean poet. What do you think I am? And, so it was very strange. But how that affected Soundscapes was I started internalizing the voices. But because I had a strong background from my family tradition of active reading, I wasn't silenced by the voices I internalized, and I promptly externalized them and wrote satirical, dramatic monologues in the voices of all these arrogant and annoying people. And that was what I spent a lot of time doing, and so I decided to accentuate the positive. Yeah.
Some questions back there.
Is there anybody who hasn't asked a question yet during our festival who would like to ask a question? And would anybody be more comfortable writing out their question and handing it to somebody and having us read it out? Because we'd be happy to accommodate that, or obviously voice noting it and letting us read it out. We'd be very happy to accommodate any of that.
Thank you very much for these fascinating things that you've brought up. I must admit, I've never heard Old Norse, and I wonder if you have written any poetry in Old Norse. One of the things that I love about language is just the sound of the language. I love to hear it wash over me. And if you've written anything in Old Norse, if I could ask you to maybe read some of it, just so I can hear the sound of it.
I haven't written anything in Old Norse. But I will say that modern Icelandic, partly because of the isolation of the island, partly because of the very strong tradition of vernacular writing that was not religious hagiography, but was historiographical or legal or folkloric and reflecting local tradition, and partly because of conscious island pride versus mainland Scandinavia around the years 1000 to the 1500s. Because of that, modern Icelandic has remained much, much closer to Old Icelandic, to the extent that when I was visiting Iceland for the first time, I found that perfectly ordinary Icelanders with jobs like farming had sets of the medieval sagas on the shelves and could read them. So I would really recommend that you go to YouTube and find a modern Icelander. There's a guy who chants, I can't remember his name, he chants Eddu Kvæði, which is the poems of the Edda, and I think that if you listen to him chanting, you'd also get a sense of the way that language lifts into a musicalized tradition. So I really recommend whoever it is who chants the Eddu Kvæði, EDDU, KV, run together, which is the letter called ash, what looks like a curvy D with a line through it, which is a th, which is the letter called eth, and then normal I, EDDUKV, A smooshed, funny looking eth, I. Yeah.
Yeah, your remark that your desire to hear
Yes.
Old Norse wash over you reminds me of a remark by Anthony, who, in an interview with the Yale Review, which you can read online.
It's a wonderful magazine, and I'm genuinely so pleased because the editors asked me good questions which made me revise poems. Normally I lose my temper when people ask me to revise poems. They say, don't you have counted every allusion instead of like possibly change a thing?
Yeah.
But in this case, I was perfectly happy to change things.
Yeah, it's a good magazine.
It's a very good magazine,
And you said in it, I feel language and languages wash through me. I feel the current of events.
Yes.
I love that remark. Current events as a current and as something that flows through you through language.
Yes. So of course there's current in the sense of electric current and that which electrifies us, and we are nervous beings in the good old sense of nervous, apprehensive in the good sense of apprehensive, we apprehend one another, but also the current is in the sense of water, and you can see of course there's a whole climate angle on this with the great currents of the Atlantic which keep us alive are now changing their patterns. But I think the poem you're talking about is one that I wrote in response to Zoe Goulding, maybe?
This is a poem that I'm kind of fascinated with, that is about water and about language, and it's called Outpouring.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I would like to give you a little bit of background to the poem. So I'm going to give you the notes, which is the wrong thing to do, but then I didn't give you the notes beforehand with the other one, which was also the wrong thing to do. So Zoe Goulding
Can't win, right?
No, I've signed up to the court of losers. But the poet Zoe Goulding had AHRC funding, which is Arts and Humanities Research Council funding, for a project to an expanded translation. And I was over in Bangor, not the Northern Irish one, but the one in North Wales. So I'd be hearing all these amazing plurilingual writers and witnessing acts of intersemiotic translation. And then Zoe told me about a project she had with a French poet, where he was listening to subterranean rivers in France, and she was listening to subterranean rivers in North Wales. She speaks Welsh and she speaks French as well as English. And she took me to bend down and listen to the gutters in the road and to the subterranean water flowing, and then she explained the movement of people as well. We went to Holyhead and we talked about the migrations and the landings that have always marked history on this island. Then I was asked to write a response to her book as a sort of creative critical response in poetic form, and this is that. Outpouring, after Zoe Goulding, footnotes to water. Frankly, I don't know why Zoe isn't sitting here instead of me, but better minds than mine would know that. Rivers that are driven not to stay rivers. News of rivers stays new. Rivers decay, decaying rivers renew. Rivers are history launderers. Rivers are mystery laundresses. Rivers are misty corporations. Rivers are mossy, incorporeal. Rivers, migratory homebodies gush out from the bedside drawer in every motel in multiple translation, filling the room, taking the window out, spendy in every currency, and the mind back to the gutter, and the gutter back to the mine, and the mine back to coal, to diamond, and the miner back to immortal in a blink or a murmur, or an ignorable, transcendent infrasong. Eyelashes, willful refusals to border, delimit, cover, glistening candor of eyeballs. Efface, reveal a skull beneath the bone, the brain within. Water again, rills of water. Pedestrian rivers, real plagues. Somnambulant rivers, real sheep. Imaginary rivers, real floods. Innumerable rivers, real code. Commercial rivers, real death. Unaccustomed rivers, real shift. Phantasmal rivers, real heat. Collaborative rivers, real heft. Incontestable rivers, real sheep. Unmappable rivers, even more real sheep. Ada the river, Zoe the scald. Tell me, tell me, tell me, tell me. Bluebell to body, body to berry, eel to elephant, meme to moiré, odd volumes, Pleistocene to pond, skate park to stickleback, taint to tongue, uncollected to untranslated, erratum slip, English to water, French to water, lyric to water, stepped lines to water, a stumbling block to water, typeface to water, water to Welsh, water to wet, wet to wired, ring and rinse, so the Victorian birds sang, so the later birds censored, waving to drowning, today to eternity, mirror to river, river to face. Oh, there are stories of things looked at, loved, lost, forgotten, dug up, washed out, catalogued, pissed upon, the scarlet woman, lamplit the nurse. Houses, the incredible numerical erosion by houses, houses, the incredible uninhabited reflection of houses, a whisper of work, a whisper of a force at work that is not work, nature, labor, the nature of labor, laboring nature, every root a river ghost, and we are in it, fearfully, we are of it, wonderfully, mud. I see through you, clear as mud, written into the book of Zoe, larval metamorphosing, mud coming of mud, nothing could be clearer, no thing could be clearer. Thank you.
I think we have time for another question. Yeah,
Is there anyone who hasn't asked a question?
I know you had your hand up
festival?
earlier, so yeah. Not waving, but drowning.
Thank you. I've been noticing patterns of, play and attention to sound, and then you also said, like, you decided to accentuate the positive.
Yes.
And I'm wondering about the relationship, like, if you could talk a little bit about maybe joy and play, or how do you go into your work thinking, okay, I'm going to talk about play, or this will be a joyful experience, or does that just come out like regardless of the intentions beforehand?
It was absolutely terrifying. This will be a joyful experience. But no, I don't go into my work with that kind of intention usually when I'm writing poetry. When I have that kind of intention, I'm usually writing non-fiction, because when I go into the state of writing poetry, it comes from a state of deep listening. And before I can enter that state, I have to quiet my head. So although I open myself in my daily experience to all the interior and exterior soundscapes, allusions, concerns, when I go into myself, I'm often surprised by what seems to need to be written. And this is where I need to talk a little bit about trauma, because sometimes, I mean, I've written a little bit in my nonfiction about content warnings or trigger warnings or whatever, and from my time on a helpline, I know that they don't always work in the way people expect. It isn't, oh, this story has murder in it, it's going to trigger anyone who's been close to physical violence. It's more like, oh, we have a content here which may awaken certain memories, because the trigger could well be something just like the change in the line of light along a doorway. And I personally experience trauma as being the negative silence I have to get past, because humans are remembering creatures, and I have a musically trained memory. So if, for example, somebody has spoken to me in a harsh or racist or negative or bullying or disdainful fashion, that continues to reverberate, and in an unfortunate way that can stick to a person. So the presence of a person may become a trigger, not in the sense of I'm angry or I'm unhappy, but if I want to enter a creative space or engage positively, I may need to avoid certain persons or certain things. I may need to ask for a green room. It's not about having a safe space. It's about, if I want to open myself to unpredictability and danger, if I want to open myself to dangerous space, I need to have boundaries with the thing that might shut me down into a littleness. Does that make sense? In terms of joy, the Franciscan friars, the Franciscans, I'm not a Franciscan, I'm a Dominican, St. Dominic used to get accused of being drunk because he was high with the joy of preaching in the word, the living word, the fiery word. St. Francis allegedly said it'll perfect joy if people beat you up with a thorny stick and turn you away from the gate. And I often thought this was, St. Francis is not a pain slut, this is not about masochism. Maybe he was, I don't know. But this is not about masochism. It must be at least three other things. One, that creation is very good, So pain or beating up with a thorny stick is incidental, and you can meet that with love and joy no matter what. Secondly, it's perfect joy because you have steeled yourself to every encounter. So whether the encounter is a thorny stick or a banquet, you encounter it in the same steady way of somebody who has their eyes on what is beautiful in both heaven and earth and loving. And the third thing would be, we were talking in the very first talk for Windham Campbell about psalms. Psalm, of course, is of Greek origin and refers to something, either the sound of a plucked instrument or something performed sounded, possibly to a plucked instrument. But the Greek, that's the Greek, but the Hebrew for psalm, which I'm not going to attempt to appropriate and pronounce, but any Hebrew scholars or speakers in the audience are welcome to. And I believe the Hebrew term for psalm relates to praise. So ultimately, I like to think that things return to praise, and bearing in mind as well what Toni Morrison has wisely cautioned us about distraction. I refuse to sit down arguing about what better fed people who can hire more minions try to make us argue about. I will find what there is to uplift people, because only with upliftment do we bring about the revolution we need of the heart.
There. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you all.